Sherdog's top 5 scariest knockouts of all time.
Yeah, we're gonna have some fun reacting to this. There's a 50-50 shot this list is total shit. So, Sherdog put this out several weeks back, August 6th to be exact, and let's just go down the list. I'm just scrolling down in the article, and because they're not labeled, I can only assume they're counting down from 5 to 1. First mention on the list is Josh Emmett's KO win over Bryce Mitchell, and I have no gripe with this one. If anything, I thought it would be higher on the list because Mitchell was convulsing on the ground. It's probably recency bias, but when I read the title, this was one of the first knockouts that came to mind. But next on the list is the lesser-known Tank Abbott knockout of John Matua, which was a bit surprising to me because most people would say that Tank's most notorious knockout was also the most visually scary, that being against Steve Nelmark. I mean, just look at the way his body lands after the KO.
I'm positive he did.
No, he's not, but it's a pretty brutal sight. But maybe they'll have that one on this list, so let's keep going. Third entry on the list is Vanderlei Silva's knockout over Rampage Jackson in their second fight. I'm back on board, this is a great entry, and I'm kicking myself that I didn't even think of this one before. Obviously, it was mostly UFC knockouts that I came up with, but there was one from outside the UFC that came to mind. That being Michael Venom Page versus Cyborg Santos. MVP fractured Cyborg's skull with a flying knee, and we immediately saw the intense, painful reaction from Santos. But as far as KOs via knee, Vandy's is definitely one of the most intense, at least from a visual perspective. Rampage's unconscious body hanging on the ropes is like something you might see in a movie for dramatic effect. There's a decent chance that MVP's KO of Cyborg is in the top 2. Well, it's not number 2 because that honor goes to Francis Ngannou's knockout of Alistair Overeem. But this is a solid entry. In fact, I had this one on my top 5 list, which means I'm 2 for 4, which isn't bad, but let's see the last entry. Lastly, we have Rashad Evans and his KO win over Chuck Liddell. And don't get me wrong, it was brutal, and Chuck was out cold with one punch. I guess I didn't think of this particular one because I found the results to be more shocking as it relates to the outcome rather than a scary knockout in and of itself. So now that we reviewed all 5 of Sherdog's entries, what do we think? We shared 2 of 5, and I don't want to discredit the other 3 entries just because I didn't pick them. I've already admitted that Vanderlei's knockout of Rampage is definitely deserving to be on such a list, so no complaints on that one. So let's go to their number 4, Tank Abbott's knockout win over John Matua. Like I said earlier, if they were going to go with a Tank Abbott knockout, I was surprised they didn't pick his knockout over Steve Nelmark. But Sherdog mentioned that upon being knocked out, Matua's arms had stiffened and his legs started shaking after Tank's follow-up punch. And I get it. But I still think 2 entries on my list were better. First, probably the most notorious and brutal follow-up punch, Dan Henderson's knockout of Michael Bisping in their first fight. As far as landing one more blow to an already unconscious opponent, I don't know how anyone can say Hendo didn't land a more devastating blow compared to Tank. Or, at the very least, visually scarier. Looked to me like Hendo had way more torque and really put everything he had into that last punch. And Tank was already quite low to the ground, having way less leverage when throwing his final diving punch. And if someone had to name an old-school knockout, the most terrifying one by far is Gary Goodridge and his KO win over Paul Herrera. I didn't really have my list of 5 in a specific order, but it was tough capping it off at that low a number. So for my final entry, I had quite a few to consider, like Edson Barboza's knockout of Beneil Dariush or Jorge Masvidal's knockout of Ben Askren. I was actually pretty confident that I'd choose a brutal head kick knockout, but had to figure out which one to go with. Maybe one from Cowboy Cerrone or Crocop. I nearly picked Alan Belcher's head kick knockout of Jorge Santiago due to his follow-up punch after that devastating head kick. I was kind of stuck between Belcher's knockout and Edson Barboza's over Terry Edom. Not because it was flashy, but the fall resembled something like a lumberjack knocking over a tree. But of course, then I remembered a couple more. Rich Franklin's knockout over Nate Quarry looked quite similar, but personally, I thought Quarry's unconscious body, arms stiffened out, was the scarier result. And although this next one is lesser known now, it was absolutely a contender, that being Sam Stout's knockout of Eve Edwards, because not only was Edwards completely unconscious while falling to the ground, but Edwards hit his head hard on the canvas and it even bounced off, hitting his head yet again. When thinking of UFC 131, which was in June of 2011, by the way, Stout's knockout win probably isn't the first thing that comes to mind, but right after the event, it was probably the number one thing fans were talking about. I ultimately went with Rich Franklin's knockout of Quarry, which is fine because I noticed Sherdog has a few honorable mentions, and it's totally fair for me to do the same. Now let's take a look at those honorable mentions. Yeah, definitely several knockouts that were mentioned are listed. In fact, between the honorable mentions and the actual list, every one of my specifically mentioned knockouts is there. Well, except for Barboza's flying knee knockout of Dariush. And again, Sherdog put this list out several weeks back, August 6th of 2025 for those watching in the future. But it turns out that just 4 months earlier, Bloody Elbow put out their list for the same topic. Funny enough, their list is even closer to mine. Their first, second, and third spots in order go to Hendo's knockout of Bisping, Francis Ngannou's knockout of Overeem, and Josh Emmett's knockout of Bryce Mitchell. Yes, technically I didn't pick Barboza's knockout of Terry Edom, but that's number 4, and their number 5 entry hasn't been mentioned at all at this point, but in my opinion, it's a solid entry. It's Uriah Hall's knockout of Adam Sella from The Ultimate Fighter Season 17. So it's not hard to understand why this one may have not been mentioned previously. Our minds don't necessarily go to exhibition fights on The Ultimate Fighter, but I have no gripe with this entry. In fact, many consider this to be the greatest tough knockout of any season. Well, we certainly went over quite a few fights, and I definitely want to hear your opinions as well in the comments below. Remix is signing out, and I'll return to bring all you fight freaks your MMA fix. Ah, shit. I forgot about the Jessica Andrade slam knockout of Rose Namajunas. Is it too late to change my...